Thank you everyone for coming to the webinar. I hope you now see the screen. So I am Rob Sanderson, the semantic architect for the Getty, and responsible for establishing consensus around the standards that we use across the organization for representing our cultural heritage information. There's my email address and my Twitter handle. Please feel free to reach out at any time. So, one of the most perhaps important things that as an organization we can do is to agree upon standards. But not only as an organization do we need to do that, but as a community. So as Vanessa said, the way that we will benefit as a community from linked data is when all of our information can be connected up by the use of these standards and the use of common identifiers as established and maintained by shared vocabularies. So the benefits of using standards according to us, we have these shared models that encode institutional expertise, and not just a single institution, but as a community, we can all contribute into this process of building the models and ensuring that our use cases are met by them. It reduces the implementation cost for two reasons. The first is that we can share components at the implementation level. We don't all need to separately implement everything. If there is open source and open standards, we can use those shared components between systems. It reduces also the cost for design and documentation. If you can simply hand the standard to someone to implement rather than starting from scratch to design what has to be done, then you've saved a lot of time in that process. And it's also valuable to point out that innovation is still possible even within standards. And in fact, I would argue it's easier because the common, boring, easy stuff has been defined by the standard. And any good standard will allow additional extensions within defined guidelines as to how to work with the standard to make improvements. So the benefits of linked open data as the standard for that, we've already heard a little bit about from Thanasis, but from our perspective and from a data perspective, the data management is better because it allows us to give more accurate descriptions rather than a whole bunch of text fields that is useful to read as a human, but doesn't help you as much with the information access that Dennis was talking about. And we've already gone into some detail about how easy it is to integrate between systems. And I'll note that we have arches internally at the Getty, but also TMS for the museum collection management system. So we're really grateful to Gallo Systems for being part of this work as well. Our data publication. So we have valuable information to share, and Arches and linked open data lets us do that in a standard way to enable others to build upon it. So either by building applications or by simply doing research with it. And then consumption, of course, we are absolutely not the only organization with valuable information. We recognize that, and we want to be able to link to it, as well as allowing others to link to us. So to that end, we are working on a shared model that we call linked art, the Getty being primarily an art museum, which is a linked open usable data, and I'll get to why we add usable in here in a minute, that's collaboratively designed to work across cultural heritage organizations. It's easy to publish and enables a variety of consuming applications to be built. The core principles that we use for the design and of this work are to focus primarily on usability. I'll explain this in a sec. rather than 100% precision or completeness. So we want to solve essentially 90% of the use cases while using only 10% of the effort, because it's that last 10% of use cases that maybe only one or a very small number of institutions have that really add to the complexity and add to the effort. So if we can get to the 90% and then allow that remaining 10% to be handled via innovation and extensions, then we think that we will have achieved our goal. It also then tries to consistently solve challenges from real data. So instead of everyone coming up with their own practices, we want to be consistent across the field. And development is iterative as we discover new use cases. So one of the often cited things about linked open data is that it's more complicated to use than it could be. This is, I think, due to a slight miscommunication about exactly what linked open data is intended to do or who it's intended to serve. Is it easy to use by researchers? Well, no, because it's data and it's not an application. Instead, what we want to do is make linked open data, in fact, linked open usable data, which is easy to use by developers. So the developer sits in between the actual data management at the back end and the researcher by building an application, either a web application or a desktop application, mobile application, and provides a convenient user interface. So in the same way that the user interface of the researcher is say the web page, the user interface of the developer to the data is the linked open data APIs, or the way that they can interact with the data. So we want to make it as friendly as possible for the target audience, which is the sweetie guy in the middle working his fingers off to build that application for you guys. The model then from 50,000 feet. Dennis already mentioned most of these classes, but essentially we focus in the SciDoc CRM model on activities as the central point that links together things, objects, where that activity took place, so the place, the location, who performed that activity, be that a person or an organization, and when the activity took place. So this could be sampling, it could be the creation of the object, it could be the identification, the valuation, and so on. So it's this middle point takes a slightly different perspective from traditional collection management systems where the object is central. But I think this makes it really relevant to conservation, where the activities are what we intend to record and work with. So how are we doing all of this? Well, we feel that successful models are developed iteratively, and that we will not get this right the first time because we won't have access to all of the data and all of the use cases. We will do it responsively, and this, of course, comes from the first point of iteration, that will adapt the model in response to feedback and use cases. And we'll do that responsibly by considering the changes and features carefully as to how much value they add versus how much effort they take to implement. And of course, the only way that we can do those first 3 points is by doing this collaboratively, in that we are engaging with the community and stakeholders to make sure that we are adding value. Some of those collaborators we list here on the slide, you may recognize 1 or 2 of these organizations. We're very grateful to the CREST Foundation in the States and AHRC in the UK for providing some funding. And so we have a peer or cognate grant from the AHRC to this one, and look forward to continuing to work together between those 2 grants in the future. And finally, one thing I think is really valuable to point out as sort of a transition over also to Dominic, is that the use of standards and the use of linked open data encourages multiple implementations rather than providing a sort of a vendor lock-in based solution where you have to just accept whatever you currently have because there is no other possible solution that you can adopt. So standards level the playing field by both providing something common that everyone can agree on and implement, but also, as I said, allowing innovation within that space. Linked open data encourages sharing and linking between systems rather than a single database that stands in isolation. And linked open usable data then encourages the use and reuse of that data in a variety of applications where you can have some confidence that the application will continue to be relevant and to be able to be used across multiple different institutions. Some examples, the GCI, the Conservation Institute, the GRI, the Research Institute here at the Getty are both using Arches. I want to call out in particular Alison and Annabelle here in the participants list from the GCI, sort of some of the core participants in the Arches work at the Getty. The Arches work predates me, and we are extremely happy in Getty Digital, which is where I'm based, to be using Arches with the support and in collaboration with the GCI. The museum, but also the V&A, are using a product called Cromulent to map from their existing collection management system out to linked open data to expose their collection management system records. The American Numismatic Society is using a different approach. Instead, they have a triple store, which Thanasis mentioned, and are using a query language to construct the data directly from there. And the National Gallery of Art in Washington, DC have developed an internal tool that exposes their information according to the specifications as well. And ... These are only a very small handful of implementations that we know about, but already demonstrates a part of the ecosystem that's being developed or that is developing around this work. So one of the other products that we are interested in looking at to see how it can also fit into that ecosystem is research space that I imagine Dominic is about to talk to us about. So I'd be also very happy to answer questions in the chat here by email or on Twitter. So very happy to continue to engage as much as possible. So thank you everyone.